Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I had in comments a request to do more review videos. I think that was Vinod, who had requested that. Now, Vinod, I don't know if this is quite what you were looking for, but I did finish reading a book that I was quite excited about. And I'll go into that in a second. But, first of all, it's been a while since I've read a book in one sitting that's new to me. Last time I did that, I think, is the first book in Hunger Games. Just one of those things I couldn't put it down. I stayed up way too late in order to finish this particular book. I actually haven't really slept because I started the book around, I want to say a little before midnight, and then by the time I got to my 5 a.m. wake up time, I hadn't gone to bed because I was reading. So it's been a while since I did that. Like I said, last time I did that was the first book in Hunger Games. But let me just take a quick drink of my tea. Not sure, but I might need to put some vanilla almond milk in this later. Actually, some of the bergamot eased up. Okay. All right. The book that I'm reading, finished reading, because I did it all in one sitting, is a book called, I'm not sure if you can see it, The Heretic Queen, Heiress of Misfortune, Pharaoh's Beloved. This is a novel by Michelle Moran, and she also apparently wrote a book before this called Nefertiti. I haven't read that one yet. I started with the second book in the series. It seems to me like they do stand alone. I don't feel like I missed anything. Now, to be fair, I also am fairly familiar with and I have enough familiarity with ancient Egyptian culture that I kind of have an idea of what's going on, even without having read the previous book, just because I do have some memories based on previous readings. I have some idea of where we're at in history and what to anticipate and what came right before. But first of all, ancient Egyptian history for me was really my first foray into reading history books for fun, not because I was assigned something to read in high school or anything like that, but because I wanted to read it. And funny enough, the impetus for that was actually twofold. It was around like late 90s, I think it was 1999, the first Mummy movie came out with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz. So that helped spark. The other thing was the Stargate SG-1 TV series. Between those two influences, I found myself getting interested in the ancient Egyptian culture. So I started reading on my own. I don't have most of my ancient Egyptian books anymore just because of space. I have some in my Kindle, but this is the only one I kept physically. The Murder of Tutankhamun, King Tut. And this is the son of the heretic king, Akhenaten. But this is by Bob Breyer, PhD. Now, this is just his theory. There are other people who hold just as strongly different theories that, he wasn't murdered, that it was an accident, that maybe it was actually damage done by the diggers when they got him out. Because, actually, this comes out in the Agatha Christie biography I just read. They weren't very careful back then when they were excavating sites. They just kind of went at it gung-ho. They weren't, taking it easy, making sure they didn't damage anything the way they do now. So they could have well accidentally damaged Tutankhamun before, in excavating him. not, so it may or may not actually have been a murder. But I remember, okay, sorry, it's spam. I remember that theory coming across, I remember hearing that theory for the first time when I watched Bob Breyer's Great Courses class. And this is one of his favorite topics that he talks about. Sorry, I have, like, here, that's getting right underneath my glasses. So, he mentioned this book in that Great Courses class, which is why I have it. I also used to have another book that he had about just ancient Egypt in general. What moved me away from reading as much about ancient Egypt is just I was having trouble keeping track of people's names and remembering, okay, who's who. That was part of the reason I moved away and started doing English history. And then I had other influences that made me continue down that path. But I am not here to review this one. I've never actually read this one all the way through, so I've only just started it. I'm not quite sure why I haven't read this. Maybe it's just because of what I had mentioned before, the whole have trouble keeping track of people. Although, this is the time period where I probably do the best, because this is the time period I'm most interested in, because you've got Akhenaten, who was the Heretic king, you've got Nefertiti, you've got King Tut, then you have, when everything's taken back and they go back to the pantheon of gods. But this book kind of covers that time period. So Tutankhamun is already dead, and they've already gone back with someone who one of the pharaohs ended up a guy ended up taking it over as pharaoh, and he did something very similar to what was done like in War of the Roses, or you saw it also, well, to use a Tolkien example, in Numenor, when I think it was Alfarasan ended up taking the queen who had actually, she was the heir to the throne of Numenor right before Numenor ended up doing its spiral into horribleness, and what happened to it happened. But he married her to strengthen his claim to the throne. His claim ended up being through her, even though he ruled. And you would see that throughout history. You see it in, well, Tolkien's Silmarillion. You see it in, well, even just if you look at Henry the Seventh, he married Elizabeth of York because his claim to the throne was very weak. It came through his mother's side, but not only did it come through his mother's side, her claim came through a female line. So it was not really something that was recognized usually on the British side. Usually it would come through the male line. So his claim was very weak, where she was directly the daughter of one of the overthrown kings. So that was why he married her, to strengthen his claim. And the main character of this particular novel, her mother ends up being married to someone who ended up taking over as pharaoh. And I can't bring his name to my head right away because he's not an active player in this book. But by the time you get to this book, you're dealing with Ramesses the Great. I've heard him called the great rewriter. He would go and put his name on things, even if it wasn't something that he put up, just because he loved claiming credit for all these things. But it's a basic story of the politics of ancient Egypt, living in that court. You got a bit of a love story going on with Ramesses and Nefertari, who, in inscriptions on her tomb, there's actually, I don't think it's inscriptions on her tomb. It's in the back of this book where we talk about it. Apparently, there's poetry that he wrote to her, and there's been proof just from things that they found that that was love match, which is kind of cool, and that's where this story is really coming from, and from the fact that she was related to, her bloodline came from the Heretic king, and after Akhenaten died, his son King Tut went and he scratched out everything that had pictures of him on it, and this was very common in ancient Egypt. If they wanted someone to disappear, they just scratched out all images of them. And it was like they didn't exist. They wouldn't mention their name ever again. They would scratch out all images of them. Anything that mentioned them was gone. You saw this with I can't remember how to say the name. It's one of the female pharaohs. Hepshet, something like that. I know I'm mangling that. But after she died, they went and they scratched out her face everywhere because they wanted her to disappear. And that's what's happened with Nefertari's family in this book. But she keeps being called the heretic princess, the heretic, she keeps being referred to in a way that references back to her family. But this book covers something that, or does something that, for me, a lot of historical fictions don't do. It catches the feel of the time period supposed to be set in. The characters feel like they belong there. The setting feels real. The things that are mentioned in a way that you feel like people during that time period would mention it. You would tell that the author did her research, and actually in the back of the book, she has a glossary, she has an explanation of why she made the choices she did narratively, and how it was based on what was available as sources. And then she also has even questions in the back of the book. So, if you were in a study group or if you were doing it as a book report for kids. Probably high schoolers or college. But yeah, I enjoy a book that's well researched, because one of my big issues, I have a lot of issues with historical fiction, usually. I'm very hard to please when it comes to historical fiction, because here's the easiest way to explain it. I've had to work very hard all day not to call historical fiction fan fiction. And poorly written historical fiction is basically poorly written fanfic. Well, most fan fiction. And I would say this is someone who has written fan fiction. Stargate SG-1, actually. That stuff's disappeared, so you can't find it anywhere. It's been expunged. But regardless. So I find that historical fiction runs the risk of becoming fan fiction, and not very well done fan fiction. It usually has people, playing out with their fantasies of what it would be like. It ends up being treated either as just, I don't know how to really explain it. A lot of times what you'll see with fan fiction, and you see with poorly done historical fiction, is a lack of understanding of the culture around what you're writing, of lack of understanding of the characters, lack of understanding of how the culture will affect the characters. And you'll also see a tendency to put upon the characters our modern day values, our modern day expressions. This is the thing you usually see in fan fiction, and I don't see as often in historical fiction, but if I do, it's a big, that I run the other way. I get rid of the thing. It's where they will use more modern type language, where they will say something like, they really wouldn't have spoken that way. Yes, you're not going to be writing in ancient Egyptian or, anything like that, but you want to you don't want to jar your reader out of the story that is being built. The author should want them to feel like they are there in ancient Egypt. They are there in ancient Rome. They are there in Victorian England. All those places are going to feel different. All those places are going to have their different cultures that are going to influence them. And also the strata of society is going to affect that. So historical fiction in some ways can be harder to write when it's to be written well, because it requires a lot of research if you are wanting to write a good historical fiction. So that's one of the problems I have with historical fiction, is that it can be like a bad fan fiction. And then I also have an issue. Well, this is more of a personal issue. It can be hard for me to read something about a character doing something in a fictional book and then know they never did that thing in real life. And I kind of get like this cognitive dissonance where it's like, well, but they didn't do that, but they're doing this in the book. And that's more of a me issue. I prefer historical fictions usually that don't deal with main historical figures where there's a lot of documentation about what they did. Now, for someone like Nefertari, it's a lot easier for me because it's so long ago, we really don't have a good feel for her as a person. And even Ramesses, who was a big deal. I mean, I believe he had read, or it might even been mentioned at the end of this book, that he's one of the ones that has like a huge amount of documentation that he left behind. But even so, I mean, that's so far back, and there's so much we would have lost, that even Ramesses, it's a lot easier to be like, okay, as long as you keep within the bounds of what that culture did and what would have been expected for a pharaoh, yeah, go, play. I mean, it's not going to be something that's going to jar me in quite the same way as, someone just having a big historical figure, like, I don't know, Winston Churchill going and, I have no idea, doing something odd that he would not do in real life. Would not have done in real life. I don't know, start a dance hall. Something, something like weird out there. Like if you have a character, you really would have to have a really good explanation to make it seem reasonable to me and not jar me out of the world. Because when I read, I want to be so absorbed that I forget that reality exists. I want to feel like I'm in ancient Egypt. And that's what this book did very well. I was very happy that it covered even the small things, addressed even the small things. The fact that there is evidence from when they were testing the remains of Ramesses that he was a redhead. So they made sure to mention, yeah, he's a redhead. Actually, Ramesses, the name itself, references the red hair. So when you see like Ramesses, whatever, that's referencing that he, he's a ginger, as they would say in England. But yeah, I was very happy that they referenced something as, fairly small as that, because it's not something that the average person would think was typical of a character in an ancient Egyptian storyline. I just want to make sure my screen's not about to turn off again. So I appreciated that attention to detail. But what I think I appreciated the most was, while they did the attention to detail and creating this feeling of a world that was real, this author was then smart enough to not only, or just plain good enough, to not only create this world that felt real, she put the characters in it that felt like they belonged in that world. They didn't feel like you took a Mary Sue and just stuck her in there, and she's wandering around, not really, like she's a time traveler or something. Now, if you were actually writing a time traveling story, that would not be an issue. But um, when Nefertari, the main character, feels like she belongs there, she doesn't. The cult. She is a part of this culture, and it's not like it's treated as being odd. Um, I'm not sure if I'm necessarily explaining that well, but I did appreciate the fact that not only did the characters fit in there, but they felt in and of themselves, they felt real. I cared greatly about them, and that's part of why I basically inhaled that book. I just couldn't put it down because I cared that much about. Is this correct? Okay, no. I cared that much about the characters. But yeah, so once again, this is a book called Heretic Queen. I've always been interested in Akhenaten in particular because he was such an unusual character. There's been rumors based on the artwork that he had it'll come to me. It's similar to Ehlers-Danlos, which is what I have, insofar that it is a connective tissue disorder, but it's more dangerous. It is fiddlesticks. What is it called? Marfan syndrome. They thought there is some people believe, just by looking at the paintings, that Akhenaten might have had Marfan syndrome, which affects a whole lot of different things, including just there's some characteristics like I wish I can remember some of them. I know one of them is the really long fingers. It's basically long limbs. I check off of some of the Marfan syndrome characteristics, but not enough to thankfully have that, because it is, from what I remember, more affects you. It's more dangerous than Ehlers-Danlos, but they both are connective tissue disorders. But regardless, for at least a while, I know they were thinking that Akhenaten might have had this syndrome, but other people believe, I'm more inclined towards this belief, that it was just an artistic style at that time. Because if you look at pictures of his wife, and I think his wife was Nefertiti. Yeah, because that's the book before this is Nefertiti, which I am going to read. So if you look at the pictures of Nefertiti as well, she also has the elongated body, and it's something about the weird shaped head as well. I believe that they pointed at the Marfan syndrome. But she had it as well. I can't remember if they were related or not, because it was very common in Egypt to marry a sibling. Now, Nefertari did not marry a sibling. They were connected. I can't remember how connected. I think it was like there was a blood connection, but it wasn't really close between her and Ramesses. I actually didn't think about it a whole lot when I was reading this, because they weren't super duper close in relationship. Not like Cleopatra, who married her younger brother, and he became pharaoh before, she and Caesar overthrew him. But yeah, I did really enjoy this. I know I was headed somewhere before I just went off on a random rant about Akhenaten's health, but random fun fact. Okay, sorry, my phone buzzed. Agatha Christie actually wrote a play for the stage called Akhenaten, and I'm kicking myself now because it was available for little while on thrift books, and I didn't pick it up. And I can't believe I didn't do that, because I've always had a fascination with Akhenaten. He just tossed away everything that he got rid of the whole pantheon, and Aten was it was Amun and Akhenaten. I think it was Aten. Oh gosh, I have to look back on it, because I want to say it was Aten, because that's where the Akhenaten came from. I have to look at it again. It's been so long. But he chose basically a mixture of two of the main pantheon. He's like, okay, yeah, this is the only one. This is our yeah, I think it's Aten. This is who the only deity is. And so he really did try to, yes, the sun deity Aten. So he replaced ones like Ra. I think Amun was another one, Amun. So traditionally, the sun god was usually the important one. But yeah, because he just chose that to be the only, and he really enforced that too. Part of why he was hated as well. So yeah, this covers the backlash from that. It does actually touch a little bit, very briefly, on some of the things with the slaves in Egypt at the time. The Hebrews, they call them something else in here, but she explains why at the end of the book. It's interesting. It doesn't quite handle that the way that you would expect based on the Bible, but I find it interesting the way they chose to deal with that. And because she had already sucked me into the world with the way she wrote, and I know that she was basing it off of what she could find using multiple sources, I was able to deal with the way that went. Not to mention, I kind of didn't mind, because otherwise, if she went with the way that it was in the Bible, then characters that I had been attached to, their firstborn son would have died. So I was willing for that, fictional change. I was okay with that for this story, because I was attached to the characters. And that's what a good historical fiction needs to do. I felt like I was going to say something else, and I should have written it down when I was thinking about it. Oh, something I'm going to do now. I did mention last time that I'm joining in the Historathon. I think that's what they called it, the Historathon. I don't have my notes over here. I'm joining in that with a bunch of other. I'm not a host or anything. I'm just joining them and reading. But while I'm doing that, I decided also I'm going to read historical fiction that corresponds with the time period that I'm to be reading the historical books. So when I am, right now I am in the January to March quarter, which is prehistory to 500 AD. So I start off by reading Heretic Queen. Now this obviously doesn't count toward the Historathon. This is my own challenge for myself. It's my own personal historical fiction-a-thon. But so Heretic Queen was the first one I did. Honestly, very impressed with it. I can honestly say that this would be a good way to start people into reading about ancient Egyptian history, because it does such a good job painting that world. It does actually do so accurately. Wow, I can't say accurately right now. Accurately, as far as I recall from my reading into ancient Egyptian history when I was younger. So I wish I could count this for the Historathon, because it really is that good, but that's going to go towards my own personal historifiction-a-thon. So something like the Heretic Queen, the Robe, which would be more of that's more of Jewish and Roman history, early Christian. Also things like oh, I know it. Well, the other book you have Nefertiti that's in this series as well. I know I have others that are not immediately coming to mind, but that would be the kind of books that would be in the January through March prehistory to 500 A.D. Then in quarter two, April through June, you have 500 to 1500. Now this one is very easy for the historical fiction-a-thon because you have so many things that are set in medieval times. I mean, even if you just go for like mysteries, there's Brother Cadfael, who's set during he's set during the wars between the Empress Matilda, who in the book they call Maud, and King Stephen, who has usurped the throne and has been anointed and everything, but it was the nobles had sworn to her father when he had died. He was the king before Stephen was. Her father had appointed her as heir after his heir died when the White Ship went down, with all these young nobles. Stephen actually barely missed being on that ship himself, but he was having some gut issues and he didn't want, and they were like rough housing on that ship, so he's like, I'll catch the next one. And his gut issue saved his life. But regardless, he usurped the throne, and his wife Matilda. There's way too many Matildas in medieval English history during that time period. So the two of them ruled, and then you had Empress Matilda, Empress because of who she married, but then he died. It was of the the Holy Roman Empire, I think it was. At that point, they were usually like they're like Germanic. Is the best way I can describe it. So she came to try to reclaim the throne because the nobles had sworn to her father when he was dying that they would support her claim to the throne. And then when he died, they turned around and supported Stephen's claim to the throne. So the two of them fought over the throne for a long time, and Brother Cadfael's story is caught right in the middle of that particular conflict, which is really cool, and it makes for great historical fiction while dealing with murder mysteries. That in the midst of that, and the Brother Cadfael mysteries are also books that do very well in representing something what I'm looking for, but that's close as I can get right now. The era that it's supposed to be set in. It does a very good job of really showing what it was like, the quibbles of the people who joined the monastery, the people who were there because they were second sons, but they expected certain privileges because of their position in society. So that's a good book for the April. That's a good series for April through June. There's also a series on King Arthur that's probably set for a little bit of a younger age group, but they're very fun reads, and they're based, like I said, they're based on the stories of King Arthur, and they're the Gerald Morris series. The first one is Squire's Tale, and my favorite one probably is the one about Dinadan. Dinadan? I can never say his name. He's not a terribly main character that gets covered a lot in Arthurian legend, from what I understand, but they really do him a lot of they really do well with him in this series. And I think what I also like about it is that Lancelot does get shown for the kind of cad he is. But so yeah, those are some examples for medieval history. Oh, also Wolf Hunt. which gives you a bit of fantasy with your medieval history. Then July through September is 1500 to 1820. That's where you get things like, oh, I know it's behind. I think that might be, let me check when Gone with the Wind. That's, I think, maybe a bit, yeah, I think it's a bit, I think Gone with the Wind might be during that period. Let's see. I've actually not read this yet. I've been really looking forward to reading Gone with the Wind. Just haven't gotten around to it. I just had to type in because I really can't remember the year for the American Civil War, which is when, of course, this is set. I know that it's got to be later because I don't think it occurred during. No, I know. Okay, this is later because this happened during Victoria's time period, because I remember reading that one of the last things Albert did before he died was he helped prevent, England going to war too quickly, involving themselves in the Civil War in such a way that would have actually gotten England involved in the war in a way that, he really believed was not beneficial to England. And that was one of the last things he did, because there was an issue where I believe that an English boat was either carrying supplies for the Confederates, or they were actually carrying Confederates, and they had some sort of altercation with Union troops, and it nearly caused did cause international issue. And last thing Albert did before he passed was he looked over a letter that was going to be sent to Lincoln, and he's like, no, we need to soften this language. Let's do this different. And so that was really his last big contribution. But regardless, that means Gone with the Wind is set a little bit later. So that would be in quarter 4, because quarter 3, 1500, 1820, that covers the Regency and Georgian era. Actually, I think it ends at the Regency, because I think that's when 1820 is. So that would not include that. So things that would be during that time period. When I say historical fiction-a-thon, I am also including in that things that are actually in that era, if you can't find any actual historical fiction. So, actually in that era, of course, would be Jane Austen. So, yeah, that is what I can immediately think of for Georgian and Regency. I'm sure there's more, but that's really what... Oh, actually, yes, I can think of another one. It is a fantasy book, and it's called... I haven't read it yet, and I keep meaning to, but it's so long, and I haven't gotten around to it. The style is amazing. Let me go ahead and pull it up. Alright, I'm going to not make this list form and make this grid instead to see if that helps me. Ah, there it is. Okay. So the book is called Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. And this is actually a fantasy book. And it's a world where, magic is... Sorry, I have an itch. I think it's probably from yarn. So it's a world where it's definitely feels like you're in the Regency era. The style is very reminiscent of reading in Austen. It's references, just like off the cuff, people like Anne Radcliffe, and doesn't really it does that thing like if you were reading a legitimate Regency era book where it doesn't necessarily explain the reference, because that's not what would happen if you were reading a Regency level kind of book. So he made a quick reference to Anne Radcliffe, and that's it. He just kept going, which, it's a she who wrote it, but the character was he. So that just delighted me. I need to restart the book, but I remember the style being a joy to read, and I look forward to picking that up in quarter 3. And it'll probably take me all of quarter 3 to finish it, because I seem to remember it being a very long book. October through December is going to be easy. You have things like Gone with the Wind, because you got the Victorian era as well. You've got the whole Countess of let's see. I always say the wrong. Let's see. It's the Countess of Harley, I believe is how it's pronounced. Her titles are usually named like A Lady's Guide to. So like A Lady's Guide to Etiquette and Murder, A Lady's Guide to Mischief and Murder. So those are her books. Very excellent. That would be during that time period. Also during that time period, and this is something I've been wanting to read and I haven't gotten around to, they're the Goldie Weston historical mysteries. I read a sample and I fell in love with the style. And the first book was what caught my attention. It was the ladies' column. So I am really interested in getting around to reading that one. So just books like that are things that would fit in there. And I mean, there's so much more room you can get World War II. When you get to the 1820 to present, you just have a lot available to you. I do want to mention one other one that I forgot to mention for the quarter 1. Apparently C.S. Lewis, and I don't know how I didn't know this, wrote a book called Till We Have Faces. And it is a retelling of the Psyche and Cupid myth, but from, I guess, Psyche's sister's point of view. So I am very interested in reading that, because I seem to remember Psyche's sister was a piece of work. But that will be, again, part of my historical fiction-a-thon. I did add on, of course, when I picked up the new author, I added all her books to my want to read. So she will be popping up here and there. And if I didn't tell you the author's name, she is... Hang on. Come on. Oh, I'm looking at the actual history books. There we go. Okay, so the author's name is Michelle. I think it's Michelle Moore. Let me take a look. Why do they keep taking my book from here? No, I don't need to turn that off. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Let me put in here again. Oh, that's why, because I read it. So let me go ahead and go to the authors section. That's right. I tried to remove it from here once I finished it. So I didn't think I still had to read it. Let's see. The author's name is Michelle Moran. So she writes a book on Nefertiti, a book on Nefertari. I'm not sure who the next one in the Egyptian series is. Oh, Cleopatra's Daughter, which is really cool. But she also does one on, I think she does one on Napoleon's wife, Joanna. So going to a different era of history. She does one on Mata Hari. So if she does as good of a job inserting the reader into the world with those other areas of history as she does in ancient Egypt, she's won a fan for sure, because I absolutely enjoyed this last novel. So I've been going on for a while, but I just want to make sure I mention, a couple of the books that I am reading. I have started Tutankhamun. I am listening to a book from the library on Boudica. And if you're not familiar with her, she was a warrior queen of England. Now this is before the Saxons came. This is ancient history. This is when the Romans were conquering the British Isles. So when they came over to England, they were, making clients kings of different leaders of the clans, and the rights of Boudica and her daughters were just ignored by the Romans at the time. Nero just didn't care to get involved, and the people that he sent over there just didn't care to respect the rights of Boudica and her daughters. And, well, to use an older term, they ravished, Boudica's daughters were ravished, and Boudica herself was whipped, which is something that they only did for people who were not of a high social standing, and she would have been considered like a queen for her people. So she raised an army in revolt, and she actually, did a pretty good job for a little while before they took her down. But around the time to pull back to Victoria again, because everything goes back to Victoria eventually, there was a statue, and I think it's probably still up, that was put up during Victoria's time period with Boudica in a chariot and her two daughters clinging to her. Now they're like young women, teenagers, they're clinging to her while she's driving this chariot into battle. And I seem to remember reading in the book, the most recent book I read about Victoria, that they actually made an effort to make the face look somewhat like a young Victoria, because I think Albert was involved in that, because he wanted to kind of make a statement that Victoria was like Boudica. Boudica became a symbol for Britain of, courage and national pride and all that kind of stuff. She became a symbol for whoever wanted her to be a symbol for whatever, kind of like Joan of Arc did. All things to all people. But yeah, so I'm listening to a book on Boudica. As soon as I finish the book on the Hittites, then I will be able to start Domina. Because Hittites, I was like, oh, this is a short book. I'll just, breeze through it, and it's taking a little longer than I expected. I am glad that I read that before I read Ancient Rome, though, because I felt like it really was useful, and it actually, kind of like when I read the Silmarillion and then I read the Lord of the Rings later, it deepened the experience for me because I knew more. For Lord of the Rings, it was more like, okay, I know now what they're talking about. I know why yelling Elbereth means something. I know all these things now that just kind of went over my head before. And for this book, Heretic Queen, because the Hittites were, important during that period of time, that they keep showing up, because something I just finished actually reading in the Hittite book before I started reading this book is when Akhenaten was in charge, the Hittites gained ground, and now Ramesses is trying to push them back again, but they're also having to deal with common enemies, because at this point you're starting to see the Assyrians coming in. So it's very very interesting. It's fitting with what I'm reading right now in the Hittites. I'm really glad that I chose to pick up this book. All I did was I Googled, I think Googled classic ancient historical, I think it did historical mysteries, but it gave me a list of historical, best historical novels, and it was a Goodreads list. And I found this book on there, and I'm really glad that I did. I've actually done a couple more searches for different times in history, and I'm going to look through those lists to see if I can find anything else. But yeah, that is about it for me. I don't think I have anything else to hit upon. Oh, just want to show one thing so I can put it away. Okay, I've been waiting for this to come in, Vinod. This is my Sword of Shannara omnibus, and it is 3 books. It's got the uneven pages, which is what I love. It has the really awesome dust cover, and I didn't realize that this was a 25th anniversary edition. But yeah, I'm really happy. I mean, it's just a little bit used, but honestly, it doesn't make that much of a difference. So I am super excited. This is going to go right by my Tolkien stuff because Terry Brooks was very influenced by Tolkien and just seems fitting. Especially at the beginning, he was very influenced by Tolkien. He started branching out more as he started going into his other series, but you can see, especially in the first book, how Tolkien really influenced his way of thinking about fantasy, influenced his way of writing fantasy. It's just funny to see, but it's also kind of cool because you get to see him develop as an author. But yeah, okay. I think that's it. So I am doing the Historathon 2023, and then I'm doing my own personal historical fictionathon 2023. So hey, if anyone else wants to join in reading historical fiction with me, I mean it's not official, I guess, or anything. It's just I wanted to have fiction to read alongside of the historical books, and I wanted to challenge myself to read an area that maybe I wouldn't be as inclined to read simply because I haven't liked historical fiction that much in the past. But yeah, okay, I think I've just blathered on long enough. I am going to close this off. I know I said that multiple times already, but I mean it this time. Okay, y'all have a blessed day, and I will see you next time something pops into my head. God bless. Bye.